Caleb lived on a ranch called Dusty Dreams, but lately it felt more like dusty nightmares. The sun beat down relentlessly, turning the grass brown and brittle. His cattle were thin, and the creek that usually gurgled through his land was now just a cracked, dry bed. Caleb was a good man, honest and hardworking, but the drought was winning. He'd wake up before sunrise, his bones aching from years of ranch work, and trudge out to mend fences or check on the dwindling water supply. His house, a small, weathered cabin, felt emptier than usual. His wife, Sarah, had passed away a few years back, and the silence in the evenings was deafening. He missed her laugh, her warm meals, and the way she always knew how to make him feel better, even when things were tough. Now it was just him and his dog, Blue, a loyal but aging Australian shepherd. Blue was a good listener, resting his head on Caleb's knee as he sat on the porch, watching the sun sink below the horizon. Debt was another heavy burden. He'd taken out a loan to buy new equipment a few years ago, hoping to improve his ranching operation. But with the drought, he hadn't been able to sell enough cattle to make the payments. The bank was threatening to foreclose, and Caleb felt like he was losing everything he'd worked so hard for. Loneliness gnawed at him. He saw his neighbors at the weekly market, but everyone was struggling, and it was hard to find anything to celebrate. He longed for someone to share the load, someone to talk to about his worries, someone to laugh with. He tried to keep his spirits up, remembering his Sarah's favorite saying, "Even the longest drought eventually ends." But some days that felt like a distant dream. He looked out at his parched land, his tired cattle, and the empty horizon, and wondered how much longer he could hold on. He felt like a lone tree, weathering a storm, hoping he wouldn't be uprooted. Far away from Dusty Dreams, in a valley choked with dust and despair, lived Miguel. He was 12 years old, but his eyes held the weariness of someone much older. Every day, before the sun even peeked over the mountains, Miguel was already working in the fields. He picked vegetables under the scorching sun, his small hands blistered and sore. The owner of the farm, a gruff man named Senor Rodriguez, didn't care about Miguel's age or his aching muscles. He only cared about getting the work done. Miguel lived in a small, run-down shack with his mother and younger sister, Sophia. His father had left years ago, searching for work in the city, but they hadn't heard from him since. Miguel knew he had to work hard to help his family survive. The money he earned was barely enough to buy food, but it was all they had. Despite his difficult life, Miguel had a secret. He loved animals. He would often sneak away from the fields to care for the stray dogs and cats that roamed the farm. He knew how to soothe a frightened horse, and could even coax a sick chicken back to health. He had a gentle touch and a way of understanding animals that seemed almost magical. He also had a keen sense of observation. He noticed the way the wind shifted before a storm, the way the birds flew when rain was coming, and the way the animals behaved when the weather was about to change. He understood the land in a way that many adults didn't. He could tell when the soil was too dry, when the plants needed water, and when a storm was brewing miles away. One day, while tending to a sick calf, Miguel noticed a small patch of wildflowers blooming near the creek. He knew that meant there was water nearby, even though the creek seemed dry on the surface. He carefully dug in the soil and, sure enough, found a small spring bubbling beneath the surface. He knew that this spring could help the farm survive the drought, if only Senor Rodriguez would listen to him. But Senor Rodriguez rarely listened to a 12-year-old boy. Miguel's quiet resilience, however, held a spark of hope, a belief that even in the harshest conditions, life could find a way. He just needed someone to see it. News travels fast, even in a drought. Caleb was at the market, trying to sell what little he could, when he overheard two farmers talking. They were discussing Senor Rodriguez's farm and the young boy who seemed to have a knack for finding water and healing sick animals. One farmer scoffed, calling it witchcraft, but the other, a kind-faced woman named Maria, spoke with concern about the boy's situation, hinting at the unfair conditions he worked under. Caleb listened intently, his heart clenching. He knew what it was like to struggle, to feel helpless. He remembered Sarah's words, "If you have the power to help, Caleb, you have the duty." The memory struck him hard. He felt a pull, a responsibility he couldn't ignore. He asked Maria more questions, carefully avoiding showing too much interest. She told him about Miguel's family, their poverty, and how Senor Rodriguez had essentially bought Miguel from them years ago to work off a debt. The idea of someone owning a child like property made Caleb's blood boil, even if it was a common practice in that valley. That night, Caleb couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, Miguel's face flashing in his mind. He knew he couldn't just stand by and do nothing. He had a small amount of money saved, enough to pay off a bit of his debt to the bank. But the thought of using it to help Miguel consumed him. The next morning, he made a decision. He hitched his old truck and drove towards the valley where Senor Rodriguez's farm was located. He knew it was a risky move, that it might not work, and that he could be throwing away his last chance to save his own ranch. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was doing the right thing. When he arrived at the farm, Senor Rodriguez greeted him with suspicion. Caleb explained that he'd heard about Miguel and was interested in hiring him to work on his ranch. Senor Rodriguez, seeing an opportunity to make some money, agreed, but demanded a hefty sum. It was more than Caleb had expected, nearly all of his savings. Caleb hesitated, his hand trembling as he counted out the money. He knew this was a gamble, a desperate attempt to make a difference. But looking into Senor Rodriguez's cold eyes, he knew he couldn't back down. He paid the man, a transaction that felt wrong on so many levels. He had just bought a child, but he told himself it was the only way to give Miguel a chance, a new beginning, a life free from the harsh grip of Senor Rodriguez. The weight of that decision settled heavily on his shoulders. Miguel stood beside Caleb's old truck, clutching a small, worn bag containing his few possessions. He looked back at his mother and sister, their faces etched with a mixture of hope and worry. He promised them, in hushed Spanish, that he would send money back as soon as he could. Then, with a deep breath, he climbed into the truck. The ride to Dusty Dreams was mostly silent. Caleb didn't know what to say, and Miguel was too shy and uncertain to start conversation. Caleb glanced at Miguel, noticing his thin frame and the calluses on his hands. He felt a pang of guilt, realizing the enormity of what he had done. He had taken a child away from his family, even if it was to offer him a better life. When they arrived at the ranch, Miguel's eyes widened. Dusty Dreams, even in its parched state, was bigger and more beautiful than anything he had ever seen. The rolling hills, the vast sky, and the small herd of cattle grazing in the distance were a welcome change from the cramped fields of Senor Rodriguez's farm. Caleb showed Miguel to a small room attached to the back of the cabin. It was simple, with a bed, a small table, and a window overlooking the pasture, but it was clean and private. Miguel had never had a room to himself before. Caleb told him he could unpack and rest, and that they would talk more later. The first few days were awkward. Miguel was hesitant and withdrawn, unsure of what Caleb expected of him. He helped with chores, feeding the chickens, mending fences, and watering the garden, but he did so quietly, keeping his eyes down. Caleb tried to be patient, explaining things slowly and clearly, showing Miguel how to do things the Dusty Dreams way. One afternoon, Caleb was trying to fix a broken fence post, struggling to hammer it into the hard ground. Miguel watched him for a moment, then quietly took the hammer and, with a few swift, sure blows, drove the post deep into the earth. Caleb was surprised by Miguel's strength and skill. He realized that Miguel, despite his young age, had a lot of experience with hard work. Slowly, Miguel began to open up. He started asking questions about the ranch, about the cattle, and about Caleb's life. He told Caleb about his family, about his love for animals, and about his dreams of one day becoming a veterinarian. Caleb listened patiently, realizing that beneath Miguel's quiet exterior lay a bright and curious mind. The ice was beginning to thaw, and a tentative trust started to grow between the lonely rancher and the young boy he had brought to Dusty Dreams. Blue, the old dog, seemed to sense it too, often resting his head on Miguel's lap, offering silent companionship. One sweltering afternoon, Caleb noticed that one of his cows, Bess, was acting strangely. She was separated from the herd, standing listlessly in the shade, her head hanging low. Caleb approached her, concerned. He checked her temperature, but it seemed normal. He couldn't figure out what was wrong. She just seems a little tired, Caleb, he muttered to himself. Probably just the heat. He decided to keep an eye on her, but didn't think it was anything serious. Miguel, who had been quietly observing from a distance, approached Caleb cautiously. "Senor Caleb," he said softly, "I think Bess is more than just tired." Caleb raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? And what do you think is wrong with her, Miguel?" He didn't mean to sound dismissive, but he was tired and worried, and he didn't want to hear some fanciful explanation from a young boy. Miguel hesitated, then pointed to Bess's nose. "Her nose is dry," he said, "and her eyes are a little cloudy. And look," he added, pointing to Bess's flank, "her breathing is fast but shallow." Caleb looked closely. He hadn't noticed those details. He felt a little foolish. He'd been so focused on the obvious signs that he'd missed the subtle ones. "What do you think it is?" he asked Miguel, his tone now genuinely curious. "I think she has a fever," Miguel replied. "It's not high yet, but it will get worse. And she might have caught something from the other farm. Senor Rodriguez's animals were often sick." Caleb's heart sank. He knew that a fever could quickly turn deadly in cattle, especially in this heat. He trusted Miguel's instincts. He'd seen how the boy interacted with the animals, how they seemed to respond to him. "All right, Miguel," he said, "let's get her separated from the herd. We'll put her in the shade and give her some water with electrolytes. And then we'll see if we can bring her fever down." Together, Caleb and Miguel carefully moved Bess to a shaded area near the barn. They mixed a special electrolyte solution and coaxed her to drink. Caleb was impressed by Miguel's gentle touch and his knowledge of animal care. It was clear that this wasn't just a lucky guess. Miguel truly understood animals. He had a gift. That night, Caleb checked on Bess frequently. Miguel stayed up with him, tending to her, whispering soothing words in Spanish. By morning, Bess's fever had broken, and she was slowly starting to recover. Caleb was amazed and grateful. Miguel's keen observation and quick thinking had saved Bess's life. He looked at Miguel with newfound respect. This young boy was more than just a farmhand. He was a lifesaver. After Bess's recovery, Caleb started paying closer attention to Miguel. He noticed the way Miguel interacted with the cattle, how he seemed to understand their moods and needs. He also noticed Miguel's uncanny ability to predict the weather. One morning, the sky was clear and blue, and the sun was shining brightly. Caleb was planning to spend the day mending fences, but Miguel stopped him. "Senor Caleb," he said, looking up at the sky, "I don't think you should work on the fences today. I think it's going to rain." Caleb chuckled. "Zen, Miguel, there's not a cloud in the sky. We haven't had rain in months." "I know," Miguel said, "but the cows are restless. They're all gathered together in the lower pasture, and they keep looking towards the mountains. And the birds are flying low. It's a sign." Caleb was skeptical, but he'd learned to trust Miguel's instincts. He decided to postpone the fence repairs and instead focus on other chores that could be done indoors. Throughout the morning, the sky remained clear, and Caleb began to doubt Miguel's prediction. He was about to head out to work on the fences when he noticed Blue, the old dog, acting strangely. Blue was usually calm and lazy, but today he was pacing back and forth, whining and looking anxiously at the sky. Then, in the distance, Caleb heard a rumble of thunder. He looked towards the mountains and saw a dark cloud gathering on the horizon. Within minutes, the sky turned black, and a torrential downpour began. Caleb was stunned. He couldn't believe Miguel had predicted the rain so accurately. He ran inside to find Miguel, his face beaming with surprise and gratitude. "Miguel, you were right," Caleb exclaimed. "How did you know it was going to rain?" "Miguel Chirac. I just watched the animals," he said. "They always know before we do." From that day on, Caleb relied on Miguel's knowledge of the land and the animals. He consulted him before making any important decisions about the ranch. He realized that Miguel wasn't just a farmhand. He was a valuable partner. He listened to Miguel's advice about when to plant crops, when to move the cattle to higher ground, and when to prepare for a storm. And more often than not, Miguel was right. Caleb's trust in Miguel grew stronger with each passing day. He saw in Miguel not only a hard-working young man, but also a deep connection to the natural world, something that Caleb himself had almost forgotten in his years of struggling to survive. The drought was still a challenge, but with Miguel by his side, Caleb felt a glimmer of hope he hadn't felt in a long time. Just when Caleb was starting to feel a sense of optimism, disaster struck. A mysterious illness swept through the herd, leaving the cattle weak, feverish, and refusing to eat. Caleb was frantic. He'd seen illnesses like this before, and they could wipe out an entire herd in a matter of days. He called the local veterinarian, Doc Miller, but Doc was swamped with cases from other ranches also battling the outbreak. Doc Miller promised to come as soon as he could, but Caleb knew he couldn't wait. He had to do something. He tried everything he knew, administering antibiotics and providing supportive care, but nothing seemed to work. The cattle continued to weaken, and Caleb felt a growing sense of despair. He was about to lose everything. Miguel, however, remained calm. He spent hours observing the sick animals, noting their symptoms and behavior. He remembered seeing similar illnesses on Senor Rodriguez's farm and recalled a remedy that the old farmhand used to make. "Senor Caleb," Miguel said urgently, "I think I know what's wrong. It's a parasite, and it's making them very sick. I know how to help them." Caleb was hesitant. He'd always relied on Doc Miller for medical advice, and he wasn't sure about trusting a remedy from a farmhand. But he was desperate, and he knew that Miguel had a special connection with the animals. He decided to trust him. Miguel led Caleb to a patch of wild herbs growing near the creek. He carefully gathered the herbs and explained how to prepare them into a medicinal tea. Caleb followed Miguel's instructions, brewing a large batch of the tea and administering it to the sick cattle. To Caleb's amazement, the tea worked. Within hours, the cattle started to show signs of improvement. Their fevers began to subside, and they started to eat again. Over the next few days, the entire herd recovered. Caleb was overwhelmed with gratitude. He realized that Miguel's knowledge and quick thinking had saved his ranch. He looked at Miguel with newfound respect and admiration. "Miguel," he said, "you saved my herd. I don't know how to thank you." Miguel smiled shyly. "I just did what I could, Senor Caleb," he said. "The animals are my friends." From that moment on, Caleb treated Miguel as a true partner. He sought his advice on all matters related to the ranch, and he valued his opinion as much as his own. He knew that Miguel's presence at Dusty Dreams was more than just luck. It was a blessing. He started including Miguel in all the financial decisions, showing him the books and explaining the challenges they faced. He wanted Miguel to understand that they were in this together, and that the success of Dusty Dreams depended on both of them. Caleb finally understood that what he had bought wasn't just labor, but a partnership, a friendship, and shared dream. News of Caleb's miraculous recovery from the cattle illness spread quickly through the community. At first, many were skeptical. Some whispered that Caleb had gotten lucky, while others suspected he was hiding something. Among the skeptics was a neighboring rancher named Hank, a gruff, old-timer who had been ranching in the area for over 50 years. Hank prided himself on his traditional methods and didn't have much faith in newfangled ideas or, especially, in the knowledge of a young boy. One day, Hank's prize bull, Big Red, suddenly fell ill. Hank tried everything he knew, but nothing seemed to work. Big Red was getting weaker by the hour, and Hank was desperate. He remembered hearing about Caleb's success with the cattle illness and, swallowing his pride, decided to pay him a visit. When Hank arrived at Dusty Dreams, he found Caleb and Miguel working together in the barn. He was surprised to see Caleb listening so intently to Miguel's advice. "Caleb," Hank said gruffly, "I hear you had some luck with that cattle illness. My Big Red's taken a turn for the worse, and I'm running out of ideas." Caleb nodded. "Miguel here helped us out a lot. Hank, why don't you let him take a look?" Hank hesitated, glancing at Miguel with a skeptical eye. But he was desperate, so he reluctantly agreed. Miguel approached Big Red cautiously, observing him carefully. He checked his temperature, listened to his breathing, and examined his eyes. After a few minutes, he turned to Hank. "Big Red has a blockage," Miguel said confidently. "He can't digest his food properly. We need to give him something to help him pass it." Hank scoffed. "A blockage? I've been ranching for 50 years, and I know a blockage when I see one. That ain't no blockage." But Miguel insisted. He explained to Hank how the blockage was affecting Big Red's digestion and how the remedy would help. Caleb, trusting Miguel's judgment, backed him up. Finally, Hank relented. He was out of options, and he figured he had nothing to lose. He followed Miguel's instructions, preparing the remedy and administering it to Big Red. To Hank's astonishment, Big Red started to improve almost immediately. Within a few hours, he was eating and drinking again, and his strength began to return. Hank was amazed and humbled. He had been so quick to judge Miguel based on his age and background, but he had been proven wrong. He thanked Caleb and Miguel profusely and admitted that he had underestimated them. From that day on, Hank became a regular visitor to Dusty Dreams. He sought Miguel's advice on all matters related to his ranch, and he spread the word about Miguel's abilities to other ranchers in the area. Miguel's confidence grew with each successful diagnosis, and Caleb's reputation as a knowledgeable and forward-thinking rancher soared. Dusty Dreams was no longer just a struggling ranch. It was becoming a respected and admired part of the community. Despite their growing success, the drought continued to worsen. The little rain they had gotten was quickly drying up, and the creek was now completely dry. Caleb was worried. The well was running low, and he didn't know how much longer they could sustain the herd. He and Miguel spent hours searching for new sources of water, but they found nothing. The land was parched and cracked, and the animals were starting to suffer. Caleb felt the weight of responsibility bearing down on him. He had brought Miguel to Dusty Dreams, promising him a better life. But now he wasn't sure if he could even provide for himself, let alone Miguel. One evening, as the sun was setting, Caleb sat on the porch, staring out at the dry landscape. He felt defeated. Miguel came and sat beside him, Blue resting his head on Miguel's lap. "Señor Caleb," Miguel said quietly, "don't give up. There's still water out there. We just have to find it." Caleb sighed. "We've looked everywhere, Miguel. There's nothing left." "Not everywhere," Miguel insisted. "There's still the Hidden Valley." Caleb frowned. "The Hidden Valley? That's just a legend, Miguel. Nobody's ever found it." The Hidden Valley was a local myth, a story passed down through generations about a secret valley hidden deep in the mountains, where spring flowed year-round, even during the worst droughts. Caleb had always dismissed it as a fairy tale, but Miguel was adamant. He said he had heard stories about the Hidden Valley from his grandfather, who had claimed to have seen it as a young boy. He believed it was real, and he was convinced that it was their only hope. Caleb hesitated. He didn't want to waste time chasing a myth, but he also didn't want to give up. He decided to trust Miguel one last time. The next morning, Caleb and Miguel set out to find the Hidden Valley. They packed some food and water and headed into the mountains. The journey was long and arduous. They climbed over rocky terrain, battled thorny bushes, and endured the scorching sun. Caleb began to doubt their chances of success, but Miguel kept pushing forward, his eyes fixed on the horizon. After days of searching, just when Caleb was about to give up, Miguel stopped. He pointed to a narrow opening in the rock face, hidden behind a thicket of trees. "This is it," Miguel said, his voice filled with excitement. "This is the entrance to the Hidden Valley." Caleb was skeptical, but he followed Miguel through the opening. As they emerged on the other side, Caleb gasped. Before him lay a lush, green valley, hidden from the outside world. A crystal-clear spring flowed through the center of the valley, nourishing the vegetation and providing life-giving water. Caleb was speechless. He couldn't believe his eyes. The Hidden Valley was real. Miguel's knowledge and determination had saved them. They quickly set about diverting the spring water to Dusty Dreams, digging trenches and laying pipes. Within days, water was flowing freely on the ranch, reviving the parched land and saving the herd from ruin. Caleb and Miguel had done it. They had faced the drought head-on and emerged victorious. The myth had become reality, and Dusty Dreams was alive again. With water flowing freely again, Dusty Dreams began to flourish. The grass turned green, the cattle grew healthy, and Caleb felt a sense of relief he hadn't experienced in years. But as he watched Miguel tending to the animals, a realization dawned on him. Miguel had brought more than just his skills to the ranch. He had brought hope, companionship, and a renewed sense of purpose. Before Miguel came, Caleb's days had been filled with worry and loneliness. He had felt like he was just going through the motions, struggling to survive, with no one to share his triumphs or his burdens. The silence in the cabin had been deafening, and the future had looked bleak. But now, everything was different. The cabin was filled with laughter and conversation. Caleb looked forward to sharing meals with Miguel, hearing about his dreams and his memories of his family. He enjoyed teaching Miguel about ranching, sharing his knowledge and experience. And he valued Miguel's insights and perspectives, learning from him in return. He realized that Miguel had filled the void left by Sarah's passing. He wasn't replacing her, of course, but he was bringing joy and companionship back into Caleb's life. He felt like he had a son again, someone to care for, someone to guide, someone to love. He also saw the world through Miguel's eyes. Miguel's enthusiasm for the land, his reverence for the animals, and his unwavering optimism had reminded Caleb of the simple joys of life. He had forgotten how beautiful the sunsets were, how sweet the air smelled after a rain, and how rewarding it was to work hard and see the fruits of his labor. Caleb knew that he had made the right decision when he brought Miguel to Dusty Dreams. It had been a risky and controversial move, but it had changed both of their lives for the better. He had given Miguel a chance at a better life, but Miguel had given him something even more valuable, a reason to live. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Caleb put his hand on Miguel's shoulder. "Miguel," he said, "you've brought so much to Dusty Dreams, more than I could ever have imagined." "Thank you." Miguel smiled. "I'm just glad to be here, Senor Caleb," he said. "This is my home now." Caleb smiled back. He knew that Dusty Dreams was more than just a ranch. It was a family, a partnership, and a symbol of hope. And it was all thanks to the young boy who had come to him from a distant valley, bringing with him a spark of magic that had transformed everything. He knew then that he wanted Miguel to be a permanent part of his life. He wanted to give him a secure future, a good education, and a loving home. He made up his mind to do everything in his power to make that happen. Caleb knew that he couldn't just let things continue as they were. He wanted Miguel to have a secure future, a proper education, and a loving home. He decided to explore the possibility of legally adopting Miguel. He started by talking to Doc Miller, who knew a thing or two about legal matters in the small town. Doc Miller advised him to contact a lawyer in the nearby city. Caleb was hesitant. He didn't have much money, and he was afraid of getting tangled up in legal red tape. But he knew he had to do it for Miguel. He made an appointment with a lawyer, a kind woman named Ms. Evans. He explained his situation, how he had bought Miguel from Senor Rodriguez, and how he wanted to adopt him and provide him with a stable home. Ms. Evans listened patiently, her expression thoughtful. She explained that the process wouldn't be easy. The circumstances of Miguel's arrival at Dusty Dreams were complicated, and they would need to get permission from Miguel's mother. There would also be background checks and home visits to ensure that Caleb was a suitable parent. Caleb was undeterred. He was willing to do whatever it took to make Miguel his son. He contacted Miguel's mother, explaining his intentions and promising to provide Miguel with a good life and a proper education. Miguel's mother, although hesitant at first, eventually agreed. She knew that Caleb could offer Miguel opportunities that she could never provide. The adoption process took several months. Ms. Evans guided Caleb through the legal maze, filling out paperwork, gathering documents, and attending court hearings. Caleb also had to undergo a background check and a home visit from a social worker. He was nervous, but he knew he had nothing to hide. Finally, the day arrived when the adoption was finalized. Caleb and Miguel stood before the judge, their hearts pounding with anticipation. The judge read the official decree, declaring that Miguel was now legally Caleb's son. Caleb looked at Miguel, his eyes filled with tears of joy. He wrapped his arms around Miguel and hugged him tightly. "Welcome to the family, son," he whispered. Miguel hugged him back, his face beaming with happiness. "Thank you, Papa," he said. From that day on, Miguel was officially Miguel Rodriguez Miller, Caleb's son. Caleb enrolled Miguel in the local school, where he quickly excelled. He was a bright and eager student, and he loved learning about new things. Caleb made sure that Miguel had everything he needed to succeed, from books and supplies to tutoring and encouragement. He wanted Miguel to have all the opportunities that he had been denied as a child. Caleb also made sure that Miguel stayed connected to his heritage, speaking Spanish with him, celebrating his cultural traditions, and encouraging him to stay in touch with his mother and sister. He wanted Miguel to embrace his past while building a bright future. The ranch, once a symbol of Caleb's struggles, now became a symbol of their shared future, a place where they would build memories and create a lasting legacy. With Miguel's intelligence and Caleb's experience, Dusty Dreams blossomed. They diversified their crops, using Miguel's knowledge of the land to cultivate drought-resistant plants. They improved their cattle breeding program, resulting in healthier and more productive livestock. Caleb even started offering workshops to other ranchers, sharing their knowledge and helping them improve their own operations. Dusty Dreams became a model ranch, a testament to the power of hard work, innovation, and unexpected partnerships. People from all over the region came to visit, seeking advice from Caleb and Miguel. The ranch was no longer just a symbol of Caleb's struggles. It was a symbol of resilience, hope, and the triumph of the human spirit. Caleb and Miguel became pillars of the community. They volunteered their time to help those in need, donating food to the local food bank, organizing community events, and mentoring young people. They were respected and loved by everyone who knew them. Miguel excelled in school, graduating at the top of his class. He received a scholarship to attend a prestigious veterinary school, fulfilling his dream of becoming a veterinarian. Caleb was incredibly proud of Miguel's accomplishments. He knew that Miguel would go on to do great things. Even after Miguel left for veterinary school, he always made time to come back to Dusty Dreams and help Caleb with the ranch. He never forgot where he came from, and he always remained grateful for the opportunities that Caleb had given him. One day, Caleb was sitting on the porch, watching the sunset, when Miguel came and sat beside him. "Papa," Miguel said, "I've been thinking a lot about what you did for me, how you saved me from Senor Rodriguez and gave me a chance at a better life. I don't know how to thank you." Caleb smiled and put his hand on Miguel's shoulder. "You don't have to thank me, son," he said. "You've given me so much more than I ever gave you. You've brought joy and purpose back into my life. You've made Dusty Dreams a place of hope and inspiration. And you've made me a better man." He looked out at the flourishing ranch, the healthy cattle, and the vibrant community that had grown around them. He knew that Dusty Dreams was more than just a ranch. It was a legacy, a testament to the power of kindness, compassion, and the transformative potential of human connection. He realized that the greatest reward wasn't the financial success, but the love and respect he shared with Miguel and the positive impact they had made on the world. He had started out trying to save his ranch, but he had ended up saving himself, and in the process had built a family and a community that would last a lifetime. The story of Caleb and Miguel is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, hope can blossom in the most unexpected places. It shows us that helping someone in need can lead to unforeseen blessings and change lives for the better, not just for the person being helped, but also for the one doing the helping. Caleb started out as a struggling rancher, burdened by loneliness and despair. He was on the verge of losing everything he had worked for. But when he made the decision to help Miguel, he unknowingly opened the door to a new chapter in his life, a chapter filled with purpose, companionship, and love. Miguel, on the other hand, was a young boy trapped in a cycle of poverty and hard labor. He had little hope for the future. But when Caleb offered him a chance at a better life, he seized the opportunity and transformed not only his own destiny, but also the destiny of Dusty Dreams and everyone around them. Their story is a powerful example of how kindness and compassion can overcome adversity, how unexpected partnerships can lead to remarkable achievements, and how a single act of generosity can ripple outwards, creating a wave of positive change. It teaches us that we all have the power to make a difference in the world, no matter how small our actions may seem. Whether it's offering a helping hand to a neighbor, donating to a worthy cause, or simply showing a little kindness to a stranger, every act of generosity has the potential to create a positive impact. And it reminds us that true wealth is not measured in dollars and cents, but in the relationships we build, the love we share, and the positive impact we have on the world around us. Caleb may have started out trying to save his ranch, but he ended up discovering something far more valuable: the power of human connection and the joy of making a difference in someone else's life. So, the next time you see someone in need, remember the story of Caleb and Miguel. Remember that helping someone else can not only change their life for the better, but also enrich your own life in ways you never thought possible. Remember that even the longest drought can eventually end, and that even the most barren land can blossom with hope when watered with kindness, compassion, and the unwavering belief in the power of the human heart. The story of Dusty Dreams continues to be told, a reminder that even the most unlikely pairings can create the most beautiful and enduring legacies. And that perhaps is the greatest blessing of all.